and this part of her theory comes from this, she's living in Eastern Europe, she is surrounded by men. She was one of the first women to be able to even get into medical school, because in the late 1800s, women were just supposed to stay home and have kids. And she didn't want that. She wanted to go to medical school, and she was able to do that. This is like her story, and she did not like convention. She was very angry at society. So later on, when she is now finished with her medical degree and wanting to do psychiatry, she had her analyst, Carl Abraham, was working under Freud, and she heard about Freud, and she went to study with Freud, and she studied with Freud for quite a while. She then when during her private practice, she tried to apply Freud's theories for 15 years. She tried to employ those techniques with her patients for 15 years, and after that, she said, this doesn't work, and I'm gonna come up with my own ideas through her clinical practice, which I think is the way it should be, and it's implied. I'm not putting Freud down, but I mean, I'm not a Freudian, but I see his value. Although he did see patients and his cases on hysteria have contributed a lot, he was less of a clinician than Horney and more of a theoretician, and so he took theories and applied them to the patients. Horney took her experience with the patients and developed theories, and having been a success of Horneyan analysis, I think it works. And I apply it with my patients. So I think part of why maybe Horney got missed as the founder of the Humanistic School is because she came at a time when, and was in the circle, and if you look her up just for general knowledge, she's under Neo-Freudian. I don't think that people were able to understand her coming out of the drive libidinal theories, because her theory is completely different and follows more of like a Maslow. I mean, she's kind of in a space of her own, but I think probably the closest to Maslow, maybe a little like Rolome, but the growth model is toward actualizing. But in addition to that, unlike the humanists, she has somewhat of an ontological, phenomenological grounding. So like instead of saying we're growing and we're gonna be the best we can, she does talk about being as potential, like we can become our potentialities if we're not blocked. And that also makes her phenomenological. She talks about human struggling and the sense of existentialism. So, and her influence is all over. She has influenced humanistic psychology. She's influenced at least existentialism. I'm not a phenomenologist like a lot of you here, so I can't say, I think I could see it applying, but with her language is still Cartesian and there's like a kind of ontic character to it. It's hard to see how that would translate, but I could make an argument for it with the help of like a more phenomenological scholar. So I'm just gonna go through some of her theories and then maybe talk, and then come back to this. So I don't know, what would you prefer to hear first? Do you want to hear how a general synopsis of what she developed in contrast to Freudian theory? Do you want to hear how she got thrown out of the institute when? Gosh, you guys, you've had too much stimulation. Well, sorry, if I spill coffee on myself, it just means that it's a regular day. Okay, so let me find that in my notes because I had that second. I will maybe talk a little bit about how you see her influences too. I'm like very interested to see if people also see what I see. I mean, it's not going to change my mind, but I'm curious about it. Okay, I can't find my notes. Yeah, that's always good. Here we go. Organization is not my best quality. So basically, these are not, okay, I could talk about this off the top of my head, but I would like really feel better if I had my own notes. let me talk while here we go. So this is what happened. So after Karen Horney finished studying in Germany, she was in Berlin. She then went she came to America because she thought like some of her cohorts were coming. Harry Stack Sullivan, Eric Fromm, who she had a torrid affair with that ended badly, and they've influenced. She thanks him a lot in her writing and gives a lot of credit to him, which must have happened before the big breakup. And just to show you what like psychoanalysis is, and it's still like this because I've been in Psychoanalytic Institute through most of my training, is that her daughter was in analysis with Fromm. And while she was having an affair with Fromm behind Frieda from Reichmann's back, which, I mean, she must have known, right? We don't know, but, so her daughter's in analysis with him, and then she gets pissed at him because she felt like he caused her daughter to be too independent and want to separate from her. But that's, I mean, it really is, like I was saying to Dr. Yalom yesterday about his book lying on the couch, it really is true. The Psychoanalytic Institutes, a lot of things go on there that people don't talk about. With these like weird boundary things, like your analyst is your friend, and then your therapist is your supervisor. So I could see how that happened with Horney Fromm, but. So in any case, she started out at the Chicago Institute for Psychoanalysis, and she spent about 2 years in Chicago, but then everyone was coming to New York like in the 1930s, like in the late 1930s. So she decided, at that point they were calling Brooklyn the artist capital of the world. Right. And so she moved there, and this is the other thing, my life has been so similar to hers. I mean, her theory, but also her private practice was on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. That's where mine is. Unlike me, she then began as a faculty member of the New York Psychoanalytic, which still exists in New York today. It's like on East 80-something Street. I try to avoid that block because they're all nuts over there. But they seriously still talking about penis envy. I have no people like this. So New York Psychoanalytic was orthodox. I'm not lying. Come visit New York, I'll take you to a lecture. It's crazy. I was in a seminar once at Horney as an intern, and I went to Duquesne and did my master's, and I've read a ton of Rollo May and Yalom, and I'm already pissed off, but I am sitting in a meeting, and a woman who was Orthodox Freudian, and we were talking about eating disorders, how to treat people with eating disorders, which is like extremely challenging. You're an intern in a new environment, and you have a 50-pound emaciated patient close to death, and she's talking about how it's really a result of penis envy, and if you look at the person, they look like a penis. It's like a metaphor, and I'm like, really? I'm like, okay, something needs to change, but it does exist. I don't know if you have that experience with some of the Orthodox. It really does still exist in New York. So anyway, she was at New York Psychoanalytic, and as she's there, she starts, people liked her, other people, not the Freudians, but her patients loved her, and the people that followed her liked her. And so she started introducing, when she wrote her book, New Ways in Psychoanalysis, it's basically a critique of Freud, but in a very respectful way. She really gives him a lot of credit and respect and admiration for what he did, but then she's also saying, and here's what's wrong. And she also was kind of a feminist, was a feminist, so she's also trying to create a psychology that's not just about men, but more about people, and they didn't like that. So eventually, they basically told her, if you don't stick to Orthodox Freudian theory, like, we're going to cut back your coursework, and they cut her back to, I think, 2 lectures a week, and she wasn't allowed to train the newer students, she was only allowed to train the senior students, and they wanted her really teaching Freud, and you know what she said, go fuck yourself, walked out. I think Clara Thompson followed her, maybe Harry Stack Sullivan, and she opened an organization which is the Association for the Advancement of Psychoanalysis, which was almost like, I guess, it didn't have a building. It was first an organization, and then the building opened. It's the American Institute of Psychoanalysis, and that's in the same building as the Karen Horney Clinic. And then after she passed away, they opened a clinic in her name. So the clinic is, it says Karen Horney Clinic, and it's housed in the clinic, but you also have the American Institute of Psychoanalysis, which she started because she refused to take on that orthodox role. She really was pissed, and she didn't believe it, and she did have followers. Now, I'm gonna go into how she differed from Freud, but I think like, for me, and I say like a lot because I'm nervous, so I'm sorry for the clutch word, try to block that out. I admire her so much because I feel like she was at a time in the world, not that we don't have it to a certain degree, where women were not respected as intellectuals. They were supposed to be pretty and demure. Sex was not talked about except in Freud's writing, but like she loves sex. I mean, she talks about, you see quotes from her diary and some of her biographies where she's in this dilemma of, I like to have sex for the pure pleasure of having sex, and I'm living in a fucking world where they're telling me not to have sex. Like, what do I do with this? And she eventually decided, I have a quote in here somewhere, she eventually decided to make up her mind that she was gonna make up her own moral value system and not listen to anyone. And so this is an amazing woman who's not been, as a woman in the field, and I don't feel ostracized in this field, but I know it takes place in other fields. But at the time, she was there. She was one of the only women I had. It's like an extremely courageous position to take, to just, I think she says, defying convention, which also makes her, I think, not psychoanalytic. I don't know why exactly. So I wanted to introduce her theory here because I know that we're really all committed to this very important endeavor of expanding humanistic psychology beyond us and into other realms and reaching students. And so when I think about how can I help or what can I do, I think I want to go back and I want to reintroduce Horney because I think she's that important. And maybe some of the people that would see Horney, you know, because some of the arguments I've heard in the analytic community is like humanism's like fluffy, and you know, Carl Rogers had no technique and they were just hugging and stuff. But they don't understand, they don't take the time to pay attention to read more contemporary theories. So maybe by bringing Horney back, we pull in some of the people that are a little more conservatively psychoanalytic and they'll listen, because her theory, to me, I could bring tears to my eyes. It's that beautiful. The way she writes and how she sees humans always striving for growth. So, okay, so I have two things I really would want to do, and probably not a lot of time, and I would like to have time for questions. I can go into her theory a little bit. Again, I'll come back next year and finish, but I can start it. But would you want to hear, do you think it would be easier to understand if I explain her overall way of conceptualizing and then gave a little more specific theory if we have time? And there I'll talk a little bit of how she came to it and what she did take away from Freud, what she kept and what she disregarded, and so then we get her model. So I have two quotes that I really wanted to read by her, or three rather, just to try to demonstrate in a very succinct way who I see her as. These are her quotes. So this quote, I think I even posted on Facebook because I liked it so much, but is from her book, New Ways in Psychoanalysis. And New Ways in Psychoanalysis, that's where she literally, chapter by chapter, went through Freud's theories and talked about what she agreed with and what she disagreed with. So there was a chapter on revisiting the Oedipus complex, for example, you know, penis envy and things like that. So I think this is a beautiful quote. She says, "The aim of therapy is then not to help the patient gain mastery over his instincts, but to lessen his anxiety to such an extent that he can dispense with his neurotic trends. Beyond this aim, there looms an entirely new therapeutic goal, which is to restore the individual to himself, to help him regain his spontaneity and find his center of gravity in himself. Now take out the Cartesian language, because she couldn't help it. She studied with Freudians. She's not Cartesian, it's just the language. Do you hear a humanist? I mean, doesn't that sound more hopeful? I'm like asking if people agree. Do you feel that that's true?
Yeah.
So here's a quote about her personally that comes from her biographers about her ideas about sex and being a woman who was aggressive, ambitious, proud, unwavering, and enjoyed sex for pleasure at a time when women were not supposed to be doing that. So she's having her own neurosis, that would be her words. And she writes this to herself. Is it wrong to give oneself to a man outside of marriage or not? A girl who gives herself to a man in free love stands morally way above the woman who, for financial reasons or out of a desire for a home, marries a man she does not love. All morals or morality are either nonsense or immoral. And then in her diary she writes, she makes a decision one day, and I think it freed her. She says, the first moral law is thou shalt not lie. And the second, thou shalt have free thyself from convention, from everyday morality, and shalt think through the highest commands for thyself and act accordingly. She was referring to sex, like we're not, like, I think I had a discussion with someone and they were applying that to crime, or like, does that mean people can kill people? She was talking about being who she was, which was a very ambitious, strong, sexual woman surrounded by a male-dominated society that were trying to stick her in a box, and she hated it. And I could relate to that. Not with the men thing, but just the box thing. And none of us like that. That's why we're all here, right? We don't want to stick our patients in an Oedipal complex, right? That's what he had, because everyone has that, because Freud's theories were very universal. Everyone has this, it's biological. Her theories are saying, that's bullshit, everyone's different. Let's look at what that means for each person. So her most specific focus of inquiry is the self. Now, we could look at the self, again, I'm in a unique position, and I'm like totally open for feedback because of my training is more classical analytic, but then I have the existential phenomenological background. So I think self, for the people who have not had the psychoanalytic training, would mean something different than it does to a psychoanalyst. I think it has a slight difference, but I want to say, based on the interpretation I have of her theories, that I can see the self as a spontaneous, dynamic, changing, in the same way that, like I guess R.D. Laing, like some of the earlier phenomenological, existential people would see it. So, but her theories originate with ideas about the self. And after 15 years of her clinical work, she said neurosis is not about instinct. It has its core in human relationships. So here we see, I know that that's like contextual, and contextual means it's phenomenological or existential, but here we also see the beginning of contemporary relational psychoanalysis, of which she gets no credit for either, because she's the first one that said, this isn't occurring intrapsychically, it's occurring interpersonally. Our difficulties and problems aroused in regard to how we relate to other people in our world, not an inner dialogue within ourselves of conflict. So she changes that whole thing, which again made everyone very upset, but I think maybe they couldn't understand it. The field was so new. I'm trying to be optimistic, but we can understand it, so that's what's important. I'll get into this after, but her main premise of neurosis is called basic anxiety, which has been compared to Laing's ontological insecurity. I guess it's slightly different, but I've read things that are comparing what Laing talked about as a phenomenologist as ontological insecurity. She's calling basic anxiety, and basic anxiety is the premise of her theory, and it's basically saying that we develop anxiety as a result of feeling that we're living in a world that's hostile, and it's unsafe. And so again, we see that there is an inter-psychic element. This isn't, I am anxious because I did something and my superego is going to beat me up and I feel guilty. It has more to do with how it arises and unfolds of the context of living. So then she's a woman of wisdom and experiences at work. She decides that I don't want to abide by libidinal theory. Instead, I want to find ways to help people, better ways to help people alleviate human suffering. So she really saw also I think the basic tenets of some of the existential struggles that people come in with on a level that was open. Like each of us has something unique going on. It doesn't have to be the same struggle, but that human existence can be difficult and people do suffer. And let's look at how we can help him, which a Freudian model does not look at. It's looking more at, we're all like this, we all have these same inner conflicts, and all therapy is similar. And again, I'm not putting Freud down because there's so much value in Freud, and if this is being taped, I hope it doesn't get sent to his family. And by the way, I do have this odd delusion that I might be related to Freud, because I see pictures of him and he looks like my paternal grandfather. I'm also Jewish from Austria, and they look alike. Now, it probably has to do with the fact that we all have the dark, thick glasses, but one day I saw pictures of him and I'm like, he really resembles my paternal grandfather. Maybe I should spend a fortune on Ancestry.com and see if I'm related to Freud, because then I won't need like my CV anymore. I guess it's possible, but more likely there's like some kind of genetic, same heritage. I don't look like Freud, but next year I'll bring pictures of my grandfather. So, okay, important here is we have a growth model, and when I say growth model, she's saying the self isn't determined, but it's dynamic and changeable. So here we also see a more humanistic, existential idea that we're not all the same, and we're forever being influenced by our world and by the people we come into the world with, and that there can be shifts in the whole structure of our way of being as a result of those things we experience. She looked at both philosophy and psychology of a whole person living and interacting in their environment. Again, this is not, it could fall into contemporary psychoanalytic thinking, or it could fall into a more humanistic existential model where she's looking at how the world and we humans interact with the world, and how we evolve as a result of that. She looked at the how over the why, which I know from going to Duquesne is a big deal. How is this, not why is this? She wanted to understand the way of being of the patient, and this, I think Dr. Yellen, you would definitely agree with this. She was, because this is very apparent in your writing as well, it wasn't just that, she wasn't just interested in the content of what people were bringing in, she was interested in the process of the relationship that occurred. Now, you can call that, she doesn't call it that. Some people would call that transference or countertransference, but it's much larger than that, because she's really talking about how we are changed by our interactions, and we can understand a lot clinically about who we're sitting in a room with and be more helpful if we allow an openness and we look at that. We look at not just what's being said, but how do I feel when I'm sitting with this person and they're telling me this story? That gives us information that might not come up in a content, and it offers an opportunity to then maybe share your experience with the patient, create curiosity about what you think might be going on that's causing them to struggle. So it's in that way, again, there's a big crossover between contemporary relational and phenomenology, so I think that fits into both schools. But as a clinician, I have 16 years of clinical experience, and for me, that's one of the most valuable things, I think, in the therapeutic relationship, to remain as open as possible, to suspend our own judgments. It's not always easy, but we can be aware of it. If I'm feeling something, I can question, is that me, or is this something unique to the dyad? I think that's like a huge contribution, and I think in working clinically works. Fromm also was big on this, and I think he influenced her a lot in this direction during the affair. Again, she didn't take it away after it was over though, so she thought it was important. She looks at the culture and context, and I mean, she will look at the past, but she doesn't fully rely on the past, and she sees the past as part of a co-constructed reality of where she is, or where we are. So for example, her ideas about why Freud developed the concept of penis envy has to do with, she gives Freud credit. She cuts him slack. She basically says Freud did the best he could given the cultural influences he was living under. Like she's saying Freud almost had no opportunity to think differently because he grew up in a world that was male-dominated. Women weren't supposed to enjoy sex. In fact, they were to be covered, they were to stay home. And so when he comes up with the concept of penis envy, she says that the envy is not of the genitalia, but rather that there's a certain level of envy that occurred in that time period where women were not allowed to be becoming or to strive toward potential in any free way, but were rather constricted by societal constraints. And that's when she starts considering cultural influence, notices, and then changes it. And when she talks about Freud in New Ways of Psychoanalysis, she actually forgives him. I'm not saying they had a fight or anything, although I think they did, but I don't know that for sure, and maybe there are people here who knew people that might, there's a few people, maybe not in here, that knew people that knew her and things like that. I mean, it sounds like there was maybe some good horror stories and stuff like that. They were always, sitting around smoking cigarettes and drinking scotch, which looks incredibly fun. I hate that they tell us that's bad for us now. Because it looks really fun. It really does look fun. And some of them live long, so I mean, there is an argument to be made. I think her ideas about cultural context, especially in regard to her theories on feminine psychology, is super important. She's saying, this is what Freud did, this is what happened, there was value in it, but he couldn't think outside of his time, and that's okay because we all are a product of our time. In fact, like in Roman Ishin's book, Technology and Symptom and Dream, like that's what he's talking about. Like if without this lineage of, William Harvey seeing the heart as a pump, Freud couldn't have even existed as a possibility. So, she looks at the primacy of personhood in meeting and intercourse with others, which sort of reminds me of, I think, the I-thou. She's really looking at the discourse between two people and the real meaningful exchanges that can occur between two people, and it not being this sort of like hierarchical way. Now this would fall a little more under contemporary psychoanalytic thinking, but I think it's important because I think it's a huge contribution that she never gets credit for, which is her theories are about character organization. And if you read her book, especially, I love her last book is my favorite, Neurosis and Human Growth. If you want to read something by her, I recommend that book. The first chapter brought tears to my eyes when she talks about our search for glory. It really is moving. I have a few quotes from that chapter. It's honestly one of the best chapters of all her writing, even if you just read that chapter. But what you see in her book, especially in Neurosis and Human Growth, you see the early emergings of the axis twos, especially borderline and narcissism. And I know that we don't like labels, but the dynamic of it is interesting. And she introduces that, and I have found some literature where she is credited to that, but not by anyone who knows she's credited to that. So it's like some guy read an article on Horney and decided she contributed to the DSM diagnoses of character pathology. She's not given credit for that. And I'm not saying for the DSM, I have a feeling she would have been against the DSM, but the concept of the development of character is hers, not Freud. She also did not like, and this is what I learned from my own, something that was really important for me in my personal growth, and maybe this is be helpful to some of you guys who are students, because I'm really neurotic, so I'm like a good example, is she encouraged greater activity on the part of the analyst. So when I'm here in analytic training at Karen Horney, I'm a very open, kind of spontaneous person, almost maybe to a fault, like not, I mean, I don't have diarrhea of the mouth with patients, but I could slip up with patients by maybe being almost too open with personal information or something like that. You know, if I answer a question too early, I try to be conscious of that. But my role in the room really is, my experience is that here I am in one of the most profound exchanges I can have with another person, and that there is an intimacy involved, and I can't expect my patient to be vulnerable and be disclosing this in an intimate context without giving anything. Like, I'm like, I can't just sit there and pretend that I'm not like being moved by this, or that this isn't changing me as well. But the classic analysts are very against that. I've sat in meetings where I didn't say anything because I felt like if I said how I really felt, they'd think I needed more like I was an analytic failure, that I didn't have good boundaries, or that I was revealing too much, or was out of my own need to engage in a different way. But I honestly, in looking at it, feel that that's my spontaneous way of relating. And if I can't relate spontaneously and genuinely with a patient, how the hell can I expect them to do that with me? It's unfair. And so she addresses this, and so when I'm on internship, I'm trapped in a world of conservatism, neutrality. Some of the things that go on at psychoanalytic institutes are really crazy because the literature, especially the orthodox, can throw back. It's almost like a weapon. So if someone says you're like this and you say, no, I'm not, then they say, well, you're in denial. You know, so it's like you have like a no, so anyway, I went in the process of getting all this supervision and hearing that I shouldn't disclose personal information, that I need to be dressed more conservatively in a suit, I shouldn't drink coffee while I'm in session, all the things that I like to do now that I'm not in that place anymore, was really difficult because I mean, every time I went to be naturally Jackie, it was like, wait, no, I had 5 supervisors in my head being like, no, you shouldn't do that. And they were all different things too, so there was a point of like 6 months during my internship where I think I was so neurotic in the exchange with my patients that I actually lost some patients. And if I had known nothing about therapy and just sat with them as a person, they probably would have stayed with me because I'm naturally like nice, you know, and I'm a good listener. So she talks about greater activity on the analyst part, and so while I was on internship, I then went back into analysis, and I got an analyst referral through the clinic, who I, then attended parties with and lectures and that whole thing, but it was okay. I've seen her in the elevator, that kind of analytic stuff, but it was fine, because she was really lovely. But it was through the experience of being with her that I realized, okay, she's not uptight, she's warm, she's engaged in the room, and that was okay. And she really helped me get rid of the obstacles that were blocking me from being myself and embracing my own uniqueness. It was like something got lost, something got blocked. She unblocked it. I don't know how she did it. It was brilliant. And it changed me. And I work with my patients from a very Horneyan perspective, and I can see the value also in those patients. So the encouraging greater activity on the analyst part, I think is a big one. And then, like I said before, her theories came from her clinical experience instead of working backward. So instead of going from theory, applying to patients, she went from patients applying to theory. And just so you know, I know we use more client, but because I was trained at Horney, I've been saying patient for like over 10 years, and so it just comes out. I know that it's collaborative. They're very much into doctor-patient relationships. So and this goes back to what I was talking before with Dr. Yelm's work. She brought in countertransference to include the analyst's own character and cultural biases, and we don't have to use the word countertransference if it feels too psychoanalytically, but what's important is that something happens that's going back and forth in the room, and that is sometimes more important than the content that comes in. Like, what does this exchange mean? What's the meaningful exchange between myself and this person? And what is the way they're relating to me mean about them? Or sometimes it becomes the way in my book I have a case vignette of a patient who I'm like in a rage. She just won't stop bothering me, and I'm in rage, which is a horrible feeling. I know most of you have felt this, to be having someone come in who's so desperate for help, and you want to physically, like I have fantasies of physically removing her from the office because I can't take it. It's painful, and yet empathizing at the same time in the experience is confusing. That is valuable information. That is not something that this woman can tell me. She can't tell me that I have problems leaving the room, I can't separate, I'm like incredibly overwhelmed. I don't want to leave because I only feel good when I'm in here, and I'm going to go out in the world and feel bad. But I know that because she drives me crazy in a non-DSM, you know. Yeah, don't call the white coats, I'm fine. And I think here's like probably, and I don't know if I'm going to have time to go into her theory that much, but I will tell you where to look if you're interested. She utilizes the analysis. This is like, I think, her biggest contribution to humanistic psychology is she talks about constructive forces, and I think this is part of what makes her theory so amazing, is that she sees human beings as always having the potential to grow. Our natural way of being is to grow and be ourselves in all our uniqueness, with all our inadequacies and all our fabulousness. And embracing that. But what happens is that gets blocked. For her, if that doesn't happen, it's not because it's blocked. So the goal of therapy is to unblock. And her blocking is not like a resistance. It's more of like, it occurs through human interactions. So the constructive forces are the forces that we all have that help us become who we are. And she uses a lot of words like reaching potential, and her self's vastly, like she has the self that's always becoming their potential, and that potential may never be reached, but the striving towards it has value in and of itself. And then she also has, you know, us authentically and genuinely relating. But I want to stress, she uses this term, it's like unblocking. So it's not analyzing it away, it's helping someone find those strengths that we all have. So we all have these strengths, we all have the possibility to be who we are, whatever that means. It doesn't have to be what would be considered successful in any traditional sense or extraordinary in any traditional sense, but to feel like you can be yourself and be comfortable. That's what she means. You can be completely inadequate, but that if you're comfortable with that, then that's healthy for her. And so what she's looking at is how to help people get out of that. If that gets blocked, how do we help people unblock themselves so they can strive toward these potentialities? And again, she talks about how just the course of striving toward it in itself is value. She talks about how most of us never really reach, or at least on this plane of existence, reach that potentiality, but we are going toward it, and that has value in itself, and that's important for our psychological well-being. So we want to unblock what's blocked it and allow for us, we want to allow ourselves, the people we relate to, and particularly our patients, to embrace their uniqueness and be able to express that comfortably. She orients her value system and energies around human growth and around struggle for self-realization. So again, it's a little similar to what I was saying before, but because of her concept of self-realization, Maslow actually considered her the first humanist. It took a ton of research to find that piece of information, because at first I couldn't find, I was trying to look up like what her connection was with the humanists, because like Rollo May, Carl Rogers, and like Viktor Frankl and Maslow were younger than her, so I was trying to look up, but they were old enough, I mean, they were like maybe 15, 20 years apart, how she connected in that system and why it didn't reach them, like why didn't she know them? She was in America, Carl Rogers is American. But it seems that Maslow had a relationship with her, and he did call her the first humanist. And because of her, there is a actualizing quality like he has. And no, by the way, I personally don't think that humanistic would, like again, looking at Freud in the context of where he was and what he wrote, and Horney was only possible because of Freud, but maybe the humanist school was only possible because of Horney. Would Maslow have known about self-actualization if Horney didn't talk about striving toward growth first? She was the first one that said that, you know, that was in psychology. Maybe, and she really liked Kierkegaard too, which I found interesting, and she was depressed most of her life, which is, it's such an interesting, she's such an interesting woman, because the juxtaposition of this incredible like life force and energy and free sex and love and all of that stuff, and then to hear that she struggled with depression. I mean, it's not shocking, look at the field we're in, but it felt a little incongruent from the image I had created of her in my mind, but I guess she was able to use her constructive forces to still pursue, like, you know, her potentials. So that's basically and a lot of that would be elaborated on in Neurosis and Human Growth if you're interested. And I noticed we only have maybe 10 minutes or even that. Where's my, how much time do we have?
Officially you have 7 minutes.
Okay, the thing is I would love to go through her theories, but I definitely don't have time. If you guys are interested, I'm probably gonna publish this. They offered to publish it in the American Institute of Psychoanalysis journal, because that's a journal that runs through the clinic. So I know the editor, but I don't know that when they read it, that they're really, so I don't know, maybe it becomes just a blog entry, or maybe it gets submitted to Journal of Humanistic Society, maybe it becomes a book, or maybe I'm back here next year giving the second half. But I certainly, if anyone has questions regarding what you want to know, I can make referrals to the books and stuff.
I just really wanted to encourage you to publish it. It's incredibly powerful material, and I wanted to mention that Martin Luther King read The Neurotic Personality of Our Time and was very moved by that. And in my book on King, I have a whole chapter analyzing America as a neurotic patient using Horney's. So there's a connection there with King and Horney.
Right.
So I'd love for you to really get this book out there.
So you like her too?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
I really appreciate your candidness and just bringing your person to the room to speak and the insides of psychoanalysis and your background. And one thing that in terms of humanistic psych that you did mention was her views on the idealized and the real self, which definitely coalesced around similar times, but maybe even just after her, with Winnicott and Lang. And that whole idea of having a very inclusive self that you did speak about, that's struggling with ideals.
Yes.
It's a very humanistic, roots of humanistic theory.
Well, that's the part that absolutely. That was a part, when I started doing the lecture, I realized that this was not going to be enough time, but that's why I asked you guys what you were more interested in. But that's an excellent point, and for anyone that's interested in that, that Neurosis and Human Growth being her last book, it gives a consolidation of her theories, and it talks about the idealized image, the tyranny of the shoulds, the building up of the constructive force. And the other thing that's really interesting, which also you see the like kind of the narcissistic evolvement is when she talks about the pride system, and she's saying that we developed this pride system that's false, it's horrible, and that it's constantly causing distress because you can't live up to the expectation of what your pride system is demanding of you. And unless we can help, or we ourselves can find a balance between accepting ourselves as we are with all our inadequacies, because we all have them, and balancing them with our positive attributes, the pride system, it will leave you continually disappointed with self-hate, she talks a lot about, and I think shame. So that, but yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I just, for anyone interested in that, that is all in Neurosis and Human Growth, and she writes really well. I mean, she's really not hard to understand, and I guess I could just give you a quote. I just want to say too, she doesn't like the word cure because she thinks that implies that there's a symptom. And she's saying she looks at treatment as aiding patients in outgrowing this is one thing, Amanda, I was wondering what you thought about it. She, because of the product of her time, even though she recognized the product of her time, she uses a male pronoun in all her books. It was so jarring. I was like, this is really uncomfortable. And then I started thinking, does everyone use that? And I just noticed it because it was her. She only uses the male pronoun, but I'll forgive her. But so she says, patience in outgrowing his difficulties so that the person may develop via a more constructive course. Psychotherapy to unblock the constructive forces, allowing the real self-freedom to be, relinquishing our illusions, which is the pride system, of himself and his illusionary goals, which is the ideal self, which means like you can't just be who you are, you have to be superior and rich and beautiful and things that no human being, it's like not even possible. So, I have 3 minutes. So getting rid of the idealized self and discovering his real potentials and developing them. Give up false pride in pursuit of self-confidence. Leave the shoulds that he may discover his real feelings, wishes, beliefs, and ideals. And that's a real integration of self. Like, who am I? What do I want? Where would I go with that? Okay, I don't need to be like so-and-so or achieve this and that. What do I want? Who am I? Is her questions in therapy. So I'm sorry, I might feel like I didn't give enough and it's like a teaser, but if I do write it up, I'll definitely post it so people can refer to the reading.
I think you should write it up.
Write up an article.
Yeah, because as we've talked about on Facebook a little bit, I think Karen, when I ran across her, I was so grateful because as you came in, I felt persecuted by psychoanalysis there. And I was like, I got one I can use, you know, for psychoanalysis. But her work is so beautiful, continually timely. You know, I mean, I see people, my clients, who are consumers, right? My consumers come in and I see the pride system and the tyranny of the shoulds all day long.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and I use it all the time. And I feel like, especially with some of the contemporary sort of interweaving between psychoanalysis and now, being able to bring her back and start talking about her again is really important. So I really want to encourage you to do that. Because pretty much everybody I've ever recommended Neurosis and Human Growth to says, this is great!
I know that first time. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, I only have a minute, but I didn't see the sign yet.
I'm a life coach and a student here at Pacifica, so when I first started Jacquie Psychology and learned about the leaders of the field, it's everything I learned in life coaching as a skill
Right.
to be done. I mean, word for word, with no credit to any of these people, and it just extends to humanistic psychology. I mean, we've all heard of Abraham Maslow, who somehow deep into pop culture, where these others didn't, and it's the same thing with what you're so revolutionary to them. I didn't know that it, has its basis here. So I think it's very important for us to learn. It wasn't the people who taught me coaching who made this stuff up, And I think that there is a universal knowledge that, if it wasn't Karen, somebody else would have done it, but it was, and she should get the credit, and it deepens our ability as practitioners to know all of the influences. And deaf psychology is so influenced not only by therapists and theorists, but by art and poets and music and everything. It just enhances us, and we can pass that on to our clients, patients, consumers, just to live a more expansive, grounded, optimistic, hopeful life that enables them to be more capable of handling the shadows.
Yeah.
So,
No, I mean, I really wish we had more time because I would love to hear, because this is something I think is really important, and I think it could really change and invite in some of the analytic people into humanism, because it's their language. Even though we know it's not really their language, they perceive it as a language.
They're all the right analytic people. The people who, from the analytic world, aren't just the orthodox, rigid people, but the ones who are looking for something sort of what we draw.
I think there are a lot of people in the analytic community that don't know that there's more out there. I think it gets introduced too orthodox, and they don't realize that there's an in-between. That's why it's been my experience supervising students. But then when Kyle and I have a similar background, and I know there are other people here who, I know Bob Stolro was trained like that, Dr. Allen was saying he was trained like that. But we became curious about something better, or we picked up someone's book that introduced something better, but it's never Horney. It doesn't seem to be Horney, but I think I can do this, so I'm gonna try.